Jennifer found a hidden file on her daughter's doctor's computer. What she read inside would change everything she thought she knew about children's medicine and put her family in deadly danger. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Jennifer Mills sat in the sterile waiting room of Children's Memorial Hospital, her hands trembling as she clutched her 7-year-old daughter Emma's medical file. 3 months. That's what Dr. Richardson had told her just an hour ago. 3 months was all the time they had left together. Emma had been diagnosed with Kawasaki-Henoch syndrome, a rare autoimmune condition that was slowly destroying her small body from the inside. The medication that could save her life, Immunex 47, cost $180,000 for a 6-month treatment cycle. Jennifer's insurance had denied the claim twice. "Mommy, when can we go home?" Emma's weak voice pulled Jennifer from her spiral of despair. Her daughter's once bright eyes were now sunken, dark circles making her look far older than her 7 years. "Soon, sweetheart. Mommy just needs to talk to Dr. Richardson one more time," Jennifer whispered, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But Jennifer had no idea that this conversation would lead her down a path that would expose one of the most shocking conspiracies in modern medicine. Jennifer Mills had never considered herself particularly brave. At 35, she was a single mother working 2 jobs, morning shifts at a local diner and evening data entry for a small accounting firm. Her ex-husband had left when Emma was 3, unable to handle the responsibility of a family. Since then, it had been just Jennifer and Emma against the world. The diagnosis had come 6 weeks ago, after Emma collapsed during recess at school. What started as routine blood work revealed something far more sinister. Kawasaki-Henoch syndrome affected fewer than 200 children nationwide each year. The disease caused Emma's immune system to attack her own blood vessels, creating painful inflammation throughout her tiny body. Marcus Richardson had been treating Emma since the diagnosis. A respected pediatric immunologist with over 20 years of experience, he had initially filled Jennifer with hope. His office walls were covered with thank you letters from grateful families, photos of children who had beaten impossible odds. But as weeks passed and Emma's condition worsened, that hope had slowly crumbled. "The insurance company is being unreasonable," Dr. Richardson had explained during their previous meeting. Immunex 47 is the only medication that can halt the progression of Emma's condition, but because it's classified as experimental, most insurers won't cover it. Jennifer had spent countless hours on the phone with insurance representatives, pleading, crying, and begging for approval. She had started a GoFundMe campaign that had raised barely $3,000. She had applied for grants, reached out to pharmaceutical companies for compassionate care programs, and even considered taking out a second mortgage on her small home. Nothing had worked. Now, sitting in the waiting room with Emma curled up beside her, Jennifer felt the weight of her failures pressing down like a physical force. She had one last idea, one final attempt to save her daughter's life. She was going to ask Dr. Richardson if there was any way to get Emma into a clinical trial, anything that might give them more time. "Mills." A nurse appeared beside them. "Richardson will see you now." Jennifer gently shook Emma awake. "Come on, baby. Let's go see the doctor." Richardson's office was exactly as Jennifer remembered it, warm and inviting with children's drawings pinned to a bulletin board and a small toy chest in the corner. Emma immediately went to the toys, while Jennifer took her usual seat across from the doctor's imposing mahogany desk. "I'm afraid I don't have good news, Doctor," Richardson began, not making eye contact. "Emma's latest blood work shows the disease is progressing faster than we anticipated. Without immediate treatment with Immunex 47, I don't think she has more than 3 months." The words hit Jennifer like a physical blow. 3 months. 90 days to watch her daughter waste away. She felt her throat close up, tears burning behind her eyes. "There has to be something else," she whispered. "Some other treatment, some other option. Please, doctor." "Richardson, she's only 7 years old." But something strange happened next that would change everything Jennifer thought she knew about her daughter's treatment. Richardson's phone rang, and he glanced at the caller ID with an expression Jennifer had never seen before. Panic. He quickly declined the call, but his demeanor had shifted completely. "Mills, I need to step out for just a moment. There's an urgent matter I need to attend to. Please, make yourselves comfortable." He left the office quickly, almost rushing, leaving his computer unlocked on his desk. Jennifer sat there for several minutes, watching Emma play with a set of building blocks while trying to understand what had just happened. The office felt different with Dr. Richardson gone, less formal and more intimate. She could hear muffled voices in the hallway, Dr. Richardson's voice among them, speaking in urgent tones that carried the weight of serious conversation. It was then that something on his computer screen caught her attention, something that made her heart skip a beat and her maternal instincts sharpen to a laser focus. There was a file open on Dr. Richardson's computer screen, and at the top of the document, she could clearly see Emma's name. But it wasn't Emma's regular medical file that Jennifer had seen before during their appointments. This was something different, something labeled with codes and numbers that she didn't recognize. The document appeared to be some kind of research file or database entry, with Emma's information displayed alongside data points and statistics that looked more like a scientific study than a patient chart. Jennifer looked toward the door, her pulse quickening as she listened for Dr. Richardson's return. She could still hear voices in the hallway, still engaged in what sounded like a heated discussion. Emma was absorbed in her toys, carefully stacking blocks into a tower while humming softly to herself, oblivious to the tension filling the room. Almost without thinking, Jennifer stood up and walked around the desk to get a better look at the computer screen, her hands shaking as she moved the mouse to scroll through the document. What she saw there would haunt her for the rest of her life. The document was titled Immunex 47 Cost Analysis and Profit Margin Report. It was dated just 2 days ago, and it contained information that made Jennifer's blood run cold. According to the report, Immunex 47 cost exactly $11.73 per dose to manufacture. The medication that insurance companies were calling too expensive, the treatment that cost $180,000 for a 6-month cycle, had a production cost of less than $12 per dose. But that wasn't the most shocking part. As Jennifer scrolled down through the document, she found a section titled Target Demographics and Pricing Strategy. It outlined a deliberate plan to price the medication beyond the reach of most families, creating what the document called artificial scarcity to drive up demand and profits. Jennifer's hands shook as she continued reading. The report detailed how pharmaceutical companies were working with certain doctors to identify patients whose insurance would cover experimental treatments, while steering others toward more expensive alternatives, or, in some cases, no treatment at all. Then she saw something that made her stomach drop. There was a list of physicians participating in what the document called the Selective Treatment Protocol. Marcus Richardson's name was at the top of the list. Jennifer felt the room spinning around her. The doctor she had trusted with her daughter's life, the man she had begged for help, was part of a conspiracy to deny children life-saving medication unless their families could pay astronomical fees. But there was more. Much more. As she scrolled further down the document, Jennifer found email exchanges between Dr. Richardson and someone, identified only as corporate liaison. The emails discussed Emma specifically, referring to her as patient 847 and detailing how her case could be used as a control subject in ongoing research. Jennifer read one email that made her knees go weak. Patient 847 represents an ideal control case. Single mother, limited financial resources, no family support system. Recommend maintaining current trajectory without intervention. Project timeline suggests natural progression will provide valuable data for Phase 3 trials. They were letting Emma die. Not because there was no treatment available, but because her death would provide valuable research data for the pharmaceutical company. Jennifer heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly moved away from the computer, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone in the building could hear it. She sat back down in her chair just as Dr. Richardson entered the office. "I apologize for the delay," he said, settling back behind his desk. Now, where were we? Jennifer stared at him, this man she had trusted, this monster who was willing to let her daughter die for money and research data. She forced herself to speak calmly. "We were discussing Emma's prognosis," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Yes, well, as I said, without access to a Munix 47, I'm afraid the outlook is quite grim. I wish there was more I could do, but my hands are tied by the insurance companies and the cost of these medications." Jennifer nodded, playing along while her mind raced. "Is there any possibility of getting Emma into a clinical trial?" Richardson shook his head. "Unfortunately, she doesn't meet the criteria for any of the current studies. The trials are very specific about the type of patients they accept." It was a lie. Jennifer had seen the emails. They specifically wanted patients like Emma for their research, but not to save them. To study them as they died. "I understand," Jennifer said, standing up and gathering her purse. "Come on, Emma. We need to go." "Mrs. Mills, doctor," Richardson called as she reached the door. "I know this is difficult, but you should prepare yourself. Spend as much quality time with Emma as possible. Make memories." Jennifer turned back to look at him one last time, seeing him clearly for what he truly was, not a healer, but a predator who fed on the desperation of families like hers. "Oh, I intend to," she said, her voice carrying a steel that surprised even her. "Thank you, doctor. You've been very enlightening." As Jennifer and Emma left the office, Jennifer's mind was already working, processing the magnitude of what she had discovered and beginning to formulate a plan. She couldn't let them get away with this systematic murder of children. She couldn't let them sacrifice her daughter and countless others for corporate profits. But she also knew that going up against a powerful pharmaceutical company and corrupt doctors would be incredibly dangerous, especially now that she possessed evidence that could destroy them all. She had no idea just how dangerous her situation was about to become. The parking garage was dimly lit as Jennifer buckled Emma into her car seat, the fluorescent lights casting eerie shadows between the concrete pillars. Her daughter had fallen asleep during the elevator ride down, exhausted from the short trip to the doctor's office, her small body curled up like a fragile bird, seeking warmth and comfort. Jennifer sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, trying to process what she had discovered, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline of reading those horrific documents. The silence of the parking garage was broken by the soft chime of her phone, receiving a text message. Jennifer glanced at the screen and felt her blood turn to ice as she read the message from an unknown number. "We know what you saw. Stop digging or there will be consequences. This is your only warning." Jennifer's blood turned to ice. How did they know so quickly? Was Dr. Richardson's office monitored? Had someone seen her at the computer? She looked around the parking garage, suddenly aware of how isolated they were. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. She started the car and drove home as quickly as she dared, constantly checking her rearview mirror. But Jennifer Mills had underestimated one crucial thing about herself. When it came to protecting her daughter, she was capable of extraordinary courage. That night, after putting Emma to bed, Jennifer sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, a cup of cold coffee, and a determination that surprised even her. She was going to figure out exactly how deep this conspiracy went, and she was going to find a way to save not just Emma, but every child being denied treatment by this horrific system. She started by researching Immunex 47 and its manufacturer, Apex Pharmaceuticals. What she found was a pattern of behavior that went back decades. Apex had a history of pricing life-saving medications at astronomical levels, creating artificial shortages to drive up demand, and working with select physicians to control who received treatment. But Immunex 47 was different. The medication had been developed using federal grants, taxpayer money that should have made it accessible to everyone who needed it. Instead, Apex had used legal loopholes to maintain exclusive rights while charging prices that put it out of reach for most families. Jennifer spent hours digging through medical journals, FDA reports, and financial documents. The more she learned, the more horrified she became. Apex Pharmaceuticals wasn't just denying treatment to children like Emma. They were systematically targeting families they knew couldn't afford their medications, using those children as control subjects in studies designed to prove the effectiveness of drugs that were being sold to wealthier patients. It was a system of medical apartheid, where your child's life was determined by your bank account balance. Around midnight, Jennifer found something that made her heart race. A whistleblower report filed with the FDA 3 years earlier by a former Apex employee named Dr. Sarah Chen. The report detailed exactly what Jennifer had discovered, but it went even further. Chen alleged that Apex was deliberately sabotaging generic alternatives to their medications, bribing FDA officials to delay approvals, and threatening doctors who tried to speak out. The whistleblower report had been buried, dismissed as the disgruntled ramblings of a terminated employee. Chen had lost her medical license and disappeared from public view. Jennifer tried to find any current information about Dr. Chen but came up empty. It was as if the woman had vanished completely after filing her report. That's when Jennifer made a decision that would put her entire family in danger. She was going to find Dr. Sarah Chen. The next morning, Jennifer called in sick to both of her jobs and arranged for Emma to stay with her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. She told the elderly woman that she had some important medical appointments to attend, which wasn't entirely a lie. Jennifer had found one clue about Dr. Chen's whereabouts. A small news article from 2 years ago mentioned that a S. Chen had been working at a free clinic in downtown Los Angeles. It wasn't much, but it was all Jennifer had. The drive to Los Angeles took 3 hours. 3 hours that Jennifer spent going over everything she had learned and trying to prepare for what she might find. She had printed out copies of the documents she had seen on Dr. Richardson's computer, along with her research on Apex Pharmaceuticals and Dr. Chen's original whistleblower report. The free clinic was located in a rough neighborhood, the kind of place where people went when they had nowhere else to turn. Jennifer felt out of place in her suburban mom clothes, but she pressed on. "I'm looking for Dr. Sarah Chen," she told the receptionist, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes. "Chen isn't seeing patients today," the receptionist replied. "Is this an emergency?" "In a way, yes. It's about Apex Pharmaceuticals and children who are being denied treatment." The receptionist's expression changed immediately. She looked around nervously before leaning forward and lowering her voice. "Wait here," she said. "Don't talk to anyone else about why you're here." Jennifer sat in the waiting room for nearly an hour, surrounded by people who looked like they were carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. She wondered how many of them were there because they couldn't afford proper medical care. How many were victims of the same system that was killing her daughter? Jennifer Mills. Jennifer looked up to see a small Asian woman in her 50s wearing a white coat over jeans and a simple t-shirt. Her hair was streaked with premature gray, and there were deep lines around her eyes that spoke of years of stress, worry, and the kind of trauma that comes from seeing too much suffering. Despite her diminished circumstances, there was still an unmistakable air of competence and intelligence about her, the bearing of someone who had once held positions of respect and authority. The woman nodded, her expression cautious but not unfriendly. "Come with me. We need to talk somewhere private, where we won't be overheard." Chen led Jennifer through a maze of narrow hallways to a small office at the back of the clinic. The room was cramped and cluttered, filled with donated medical equipment and stacks of files that spoke to the overwhelming need for services in this underserved community. It was a far cry from Dr. Richardson's opulent setup with its expensive furniture and prestigious awards, but Jennifer could see the genuine care and dedication that went into every aspect of this humble operation. Chen closed the door carefully and gestured for Jennifer to sit down in one of two mismatched chairs that had clearly seen better days. "How did you find me?" Chen asked, her voice wary but carrying an undertone of curiosity. "Very few people know I'm working here, and I've been careful to maintain a low profile since I lost my license." Jennifer pulled out her printed documents, placing them on the small desk between them with hands that still trembled slightly from the stress of the past day. "My daughter is dying because she can't access a Munix 47. Yesterday, I found some files on her doctor's computer that led me to your whistleblower report. I think what's happening to Emma is exactly what you tried to expose 3 years ago." Chen's expression softened immediately as she recognized the pain and desperation in Jennifer's voice. "Your daughter has Kawasaki-Hanoch syndrome." "Yes. Richardson says she has 3 months without treatment, but I saw documents showing that Apex is deliberately denying treatment to patients like Emma to use them as control subjects in their research studies. They're letting children die to prove their drugs work for the families who can actually afford them." Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents Jennifer had brought with the careful attention of someone who had spent years fighting the same battles. Her eyes moved quickly across the pages, taking in financial records, email exchanges, and research protocols that painted a picture of systematic medical abuse. Finally, she looked up with an expression of grim determination mixed with deep sadness. "Your daughter's doctor, Richardson, he's one of the worst ones in their network. I tried to expose him 3 years ago along with the rest of this conspiracy, but no one in authority would listen to what I was saying. They destroyed my career, my reputation, everything I had worked for my entire life. They made me into a pariah in the medical community, but I never stopped fighting, never stopped gathering evidence." "What can we do?" Jennifer asked, leaning forward with the intensity of someone whose child's life hung in the balance. "How do we save Emma and all the other children who are being sacrificed for corporate profits?" Chen stood up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of the room, its metal surface scarred and dented from years of use. She pulled out a thick folder that was bursting with documents, photographs, and what appeared to be audio recording devices. She placed it on the desk between them, with the gravity of someone handling explosive materials. "I've been gathering evidence for 3 years," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had sacrificed everything for a cause. "Financial records showing bribes and kickbacks, internal emails detailing their criminal conspiracy, testimony from other healthcare workers who were too afraid to speak out publicly, recorded conversations with pharmaceutical executives admitting to practices that should land them in prison for the rest of their lives. I have enough documented evidence to bring down Apex Pharmaceuticals and expose this entire conspiracy, but I needed someone with a current case, someone with nothing left to lose and everything to gain." Jennifer felt a chill run down her spine as the implications of Dr. Chen's words sank in. "Nothing to lose. They've already threatened you, haven't they?" Chen asked, her voice carrying the knowing tone of someone who had been through the same experience. "Text messages, phone calls, maybe someone following you. That's how they operate: intimidation first, then escalation if you don't back down. Jennifer nodded, thinking about the text message in the hospital parking garage and the way she had felt watched during her drive home. They sent me a message saying they knew what I saw and warning me to stop digging. It will get much worse before this is over, Doctor. Chen warned, her expression serious and concerned. Much worse than you can imagine. Apex has billions of dollars at stake in maintaining this system, and they've killed people to protect their interests. Whistleblowers have died in suspicious accidents, witnesses have disappeared, and evidence has been destroyed by people who were supposed to be investigating these crimes. If we do this, we're putting ourselves and our families in real danger. Jennifer thought about Emma, sleeping peacefully in Mrs. Rodriguez's house, unaware that her mother was about to declare war on one of the most powerful corporations in America. She thought about all the other children like Emma, all the families being destroyed by corporate greed, all the mothers sitting in waiting rooms being told there was nothing more that could be done, while life-saving treatments sat in warehouses because they weren't profitable enough to distribute widely. What do we need to do? Jennifer asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Chen smiled for the first time since they had met, an expression that transformed her tired features and revealed the fierce intelligence and determination that had once made her a respected physician. We need to get your daughter's complete medical records from Dr. Richardson's office, particularly any files that show her connection to Apex's research protocols. With those documents and what I already have, we can take this to the FBI and the media simultaneously, creating enough pressure that they can't bury this like they did my original report. How do we get into Richardson's office without being caught? Leave that to me, Doctor, Chen said, pulling out a cell phone that looked like it had been purchased specifically to avoid being traced. I still have friends in the medical community, people who are disgusted by what's happening but too afraid to act alone. Lisa Wang works the night shift at Children's Memorial Hospital. She's been quietly documenting irregularities in patient care for months, building her own file of evidence against doctors like Richardson who are participating in Apex's research protocols. Chen began typing a message on her phone with practiced efficiency. Lisa will use her administrative access to pull Emma's complete medical file, including any research protocols or communications with Apex Pharmaceuticals. The download will happen during the night shift when there's minimal oversight, and the files will be transferred to a secure server that I established specifically for gathering evidence about this conspiracy. Jennifer felt a surge of hope mixed with terror as she realized they were actually going to do this. What's my role in all of this? Your role is to return home and act completely normal while we gather the evidence, Doctor. Chen explained, her voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. You need to continue taking Emma to appointments with Dr. Richardson, maintaining the illusion that you suspect nothing while we prepare our case. Any change in your behavior could alert them that you know the truth, and that would put both you and Emma in immediate danger. But as Jennifer prepared to leave the clinic and return home, neither she nor Dr. Chen could have predicted just how far Apex Pharmaceuticals would go to protect their secrets, or how quickly their careful plans would be discovered and countered. On the drive home from Los Angeles, Jennifer noticed the same black sedan that had followed her before. This time, there was no doubt about their intentions. Every time she changed lanes, it changed lanes. When she exited the freeway early to test her suspicions, the sedan followed. When she took several random turns through residential neighborhoods, it stayed with her, always maintaining the same distance like a predator stalking its prey. Jennifer's heart pounded as she realized that her meeting with Dr. Chen had somehow been discovered. Were they monitoring the clinic? Had someone seen her enter the building? Were her phone calls being tracked? The implications of being under surveillance made her realize that this conspiracy was even more sophisticated and dangerous than she had initially understood. Finally, Jennifer pulled into a busy shopping center and parked near the entrance to a large grocery store, choosing a location with maximum visibility and foot traffic. She sat in her car, watching in her mirrors as the black sedan parked several rows away. Two men in dark suits got out of the sedan and began walking toward her car with the purposeful stride of people who were accustomed to intimidating others. Jennifer grabbed her purse and ran into the grocery store, pulling out her phone as she moved through the aisles. She tried calling Dr. Chen's number, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried calling the clinic, but no one answered. The silence was more terrifying than any threat could have been, suggesting that Dr. Chen might already be in danger because of their meeting. She spent 2 hours in the grocery store, moving from section to section, always staying near other people and trying to blend in with regular shoppers. She bought random items she didn't need, paid with cash, and constantly checked the windows for signs of the men who had been following her. When she finally worked up the courage to look outside, the black sedan was gone, but she didn't trust that they had actually left. Jennifer drove home by a circuitous route that took her through 3 different towns, constantly checking her mirrors for signs of surveillance. When she arrived home, Emma was playing in Mrs. Rodriguez's backyard, looking happier and more energetic than she had in weeks. The sight of her daughter laughing and playing almost made Jennifer break down in tears, knowing how precious and fragile these moments of normalcy were. "How did the appointments go, Mija?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, using the affectionate Spanish term that she had always used for Jennifer. "Fine," Jennifer lied, forcing a smile that she hoped looked convincing. Just some routine follow-ups and consultations about Emma's treatment options. That night, after Emma was asleep, Jennifer tried calling Dr. Chen again. This time, the number was disconnected. Jennifer felt a chill of fear as she realized what that might mean. Had something happened to Dr. Had Apex discovered their plan before it could be implemented? The disconnected phone number suggested that Dr. Chen might have been forced to disappear again, or worse. Jennifer spent the night awake, listening to every sound outside her apartment, checking and rechecking the locks on her doors and windows. She had no way to contact Dr. Wang or any of Dr. Chen's other allies. She was completely alone with knowledge that could destroy one of the most powerful corporations in America, but without any way to act on that knowledge safely. The next morning brought news that made Jennifer's blood run cold and confirmed her worst fears about what she was up against. Sarah Chen had been found dead in her apartment, apparently the victim of a drug overdose. The news report mentioned that Dr. Chen had a documented history of depression and substance abuse following the loss of her medical license 3 years earlier. The police were treating it as a suicide, stating that there were no signs of foul play and that Dr. Chen had left behind a note expressing her despair over her failed career and social isolation. Jennifer knew it was a lie. Chen had been murdered because she had been gathering evidence against Apex Pharmaceuticals, and now Jennifer was the only person who knew the truth about what they were doing to children like Emma. The weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming, but she also knew that thousands of children's lives depended on what she did next. But what Jennifer didn't know was that Dr. Chen had anticipated this possibility and had taken steps to ensure that her death would not silence the truth she had died trying to expose. 3 days after Dr. Chen's death, Jennifer received a package with no return address delivered to her apartment. Inside was a USB drive and a note written in Dr. Chen's careful handwriting. "If you're reading this, they've silenced me permanently. Everything you need to expose this conspiracy is on this drive. Trust no one in the medical establishment. They're all either part of the conspiracy or too afraid to act. Take this evidence to Maria Santos at Channel 7 News." She's been investigating Apex for 2 years, but couldn't get the hard evidence she needed to publish her story. The password for the files is Emma's birthday month, day, year with no spaces. Jennifer's hands shook as she plugged the USB drive into her laptop, her heart pounding as she entered Emma's birthday as the password. The files opened to reveal hundreds of documents, emails, financial records, and audio recordings that detailed the full scope of Apex Pharmaceuticals' conspiracy in devastating detail. There were emails between Apex executives discussing which children to let die for their research, financial records showing bribes paid to FDA officials and physicians, audio recordings of phone calls where corporate executives laughed about population control through selective treatment, and spreadsheets tracking the deaths of children who had been denied treatment for research purposes. Most horrifying of all, there was a master spreadsheet with over 3,000 names of children who had been denied treatment as part of Apex's research protocols over the past 5 years. Emma's name was on the list, along with a notation that read ideal control subject, isolated family unit, limited financial resources, minimal advocacy support, optimal disease progression timeline. Jennifer realized that Dr. Chen's death meant she was now the only person who possessed this evidence, and the weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming. But she also knew that thousands of children's lives depended on what she did next, and she couldn't let Dr. Chen's sacrifice be in vain. The next morning, Jennifer arranged for Emma to stay with Mrs. Rodriguez again and drove to Channel 7 News, determined to find Maria Santos and expose this conspiracy to the world. She waited in the lobby for 3 hours, clutching the USB drive like a lifeline, before Maria Santos agreed to see her. Santos was a small, intense woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see through any deception or evasion. She had built a reputation for taking on powerful corporations and government agencies, winning Emmy Awards for investigations that had led to criminal prosecutions and legislative reforms. "You have evidence about Apex Pharmaceuticals?" Santos asked, cutting straight to the point with the efficiency of someone who dealt with whistleblowers and sources regularly. Jennifer pulled out the USB drive, with hands that were still trembling from the stress of carrying such explosive information. Sarah Chen gathered this evidence before she was murdered 3 days ago. It proves that Apex is systematically denying treatment to children to use them as control subjects in research studies, while selling the same treatments to wealthy families who can afford to pay inflated prices. Santos plugged the USB drive into her computer and began scrolling through the files, her expression growing darker and more determined as she read email after email detailing the conspiracy. As she reviewed the financial records and listened to audio recordings, her jaw tightened with the controlled anger of someone who had seen corporate corruption before, but never at this level of systematic cruelty. "This is it," Santos said finally, looking up from her computer screen with an expression of grim satisfaction. "This is exactly what I've been looking for to complete my investigation. But Jennifer, you need to understand what this means. If we expose this conspiracy, Apex will come after you with everything they have. They've already killed Dr. Chen to protect their secrets. They won't hesitate to target you and your daughter if they think you're a threat to their billion-dollar operation." Jennifer thought about Emma, growing weaker every day while the medication that could save her life sat in warehouses being rationed based on ability to pay rather than medical need. She thought about the 3,000 other children on that spreadsheet, all of them being sacrificed for corporate profits, while their families were told there was nothing more that could be done. "They're already killing my daughter," Jennifer said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "At least this way, she has a chance, and maybe we can save some of the other children before it's too late." Maria Santos spent the next week verifying the documents and building additional sources to corroborate Dr. Chen's evidence. She reached out to Dr. Lisa Wang at Children's Memorial Hospital, who confirmed that she had been working with Dr. Chen and was willing to go on record about the conspiracy, despite the personal risks involved. Wang provided additional evidence from her position inside the hospital system, including internal memos directing physicians to steer certain patients away from effective treatments in favor of more expensive alternatives that would benefit Apex's research partnerships. She also provided documentation showing how the hospital administration was complicit in the conspiracy, receiving substantial research grants from Apex in exchange for their cooperation in the systematic denial of care to poor patients. But as they prepared to publish the story that would expose one of the largest medical conspiracies in American history, Apex Pharmaceuticals made a move that none of them had anticipated, a desperate gambit designed to silence Jennifer permanently. Emma collapsed at school during what should have been a routine day in her second-grade classroom. Jennifer received the frantic call while she was at Maria Santos's office, going over the final details of their exposé and preparing for the media storm that would follow its publication. Patterson, Emma's teacher, was crying as she explained that Emma had been participating in a reading group when she suddenly fell to the floor, her small body convulsing in what appeared to be a severe seizure. The ambulance had rushed Emma to Children's Memorial Hospital, and Dr. Richardson was demanding to see Jennifer immediately. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Jennifer knew that Apex had somehow precipitated this crisis to manipulate her into silence. Jennifer arrived at the hospital to find Emma unconscious in the intensive care unit, surrounded by machines and monitors that beeped and hummed with the sounds of life support technology. Richardson was waiting for her with a grim expression that Jennifer now recognized as carefully manufactured theater, designed to manipulate her emotions. Emma's condition has deteriorated rapidly, he said, speaking with the same tone of professional concern that Jennifer now knew was completely false. She's experiencing systemic organ failure that we didn't expect to see for several more weeks. We need to start treatment with a Munex 47 immediately, or she'll be dead within 48 hours. Jennifer stared at him, this man who had been planning to let her daughter die for research purposes, now claiming he wanted to save her life. The irony was almost too much to bear. And the cost? Jennifer asked, though she already knew what his answer would be. The insurance company has suddenly approved the treatment, Dr. Richardson said, his voice carrying a note of barely concealed satisfaction. Full coverage, no questions asked, no paperwork delays. We can start the infusions this afternoon and have Emma feeling better within days. Jennifer realized exactly what was happening. Apex had learned about her investigation and was trying to silence her by saving Emma's life, betting that a grateful mother wouldn't destroy the company that had rescued her daughter from death. They were offering her a devil's bargain, Emma's life in exchange for her silence about the thousands of other children who would continue to die without treatment. They had made a crucial miscalculation about Jennifer Mills and what she was willing to sacrifice for justice. Start the treatment, Jennifer said, her voice steady and determined. But Dr. Richardson, you should know that I've seen your files. I know about the research protocols, the control subjects, the deliberate denial of treatment to children whose families can't afford to pay. I know about all of it. Richardson's face went pale as he realized that his careful deception had been discovered. I don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Mills. I think the stress of Emma's condition is causing you to imagine things that aren't real. I know about the 3,000 children on your list, Jennifer continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. I know about the bribes, the covered-up deaths, the systematic murder of children for corporate profits. And tomorrow morning, the whole world is going to know about it too. Jennifer left Dr. Richardson standing in the ICU, his carefully maintained professional facade cracking as he realized that his threats and manipulations had failed completely. She returned to Channel 7 News and called Maria Santos from the hospital parking lot. "They're treating Emma," she told the reporter, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and determination. "They're trying to buy my silence by saving her life at the last possible moment." "Are you going to let them?" Santos asked, though she already knew what Jennifer's answer would be. Jennifer looked back at the hospital where her daughter was finally receiving the treatment that could save her life. Treatment that had been available all along, but withheld for corporate profit and research purposes. "No," she said firmly. "We publish the story tomorrow as planned. Emma's getting the treatment she needs, but there are thousands of other children who won't be so lucky unless we stop this systematic murder once and for all." The story broke on a Wednesday morning, simultaneously across television, print, and online media platforms in a coordinated release that Maria Santos had arranged with journalists across the country to ensure maximum impact and prevent any attempts at suppression. The headline read, "Children Left to Die. Pharmaceutical Giant's Secret Research Program Exposed. Exclusive Investigation Reveals Systematic Denial of Life-Saving Treatment." The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Financial documents showing bribes to FDA officials in exchange for delayed approvals of generic alternatives. Audio recordings of Apex executives discussing which children to let die for research purposes while laughing about the profits they were generating. Email chains between physicians detailing how to identify and exclude patients who couldn't afford treatment, turning hospitals into sorting facilities for corporate profit rather than centers of healing. But the most damning evidence was the spreadsheet with 3,000 names of children who had been deliberately denied treatment to serve as control subjects in clinical trials. Each name represented a family destroyed, a life cut short, a future stolen for the sake of corporate profits and research data that would be used to sell the same treatments to wealthier patients. The public reaction was immediate, visceral, and furious. Protests erupted outside Apex Pharmaceuticals' headquarters within hours of the story breaking. Families of children who had died began filing wrongful death lawsuits that would eventually total in the billions of dollars. The FBI launched a criminal investigation that would lead to the largest healthcare fraud prosecution in American history. But Apex Pharmaceuticals' response was swift, vicious, and designed to send a clear message to anyone else who might consider exposing their crimes. That afternoon, Jennifer received a call from the hospital that made her blood run cold. Emma's treatment had been suspended immediately. Richardson claimed there had been an adverse reaction that made it too dangerous to continue the Amunex 47 infusions, though he couldn't provide any medical evidence to support his assertion. Jennifer raced to the hospital to find Emma back in the intensive care unit, her condition rapidly deteriorating as the life-saving medication was withdrawn from her system. Richardson was nowhere to be found, and the nursing staff claimed they were just following orders from the attending physician and hospital administration. Jennifer realized that Apex was willing to let Emma die to send a message to anyone else who might consider exposing their crimes. They were demonstrating their power to control life and death decisions even after their conspiracy had been exposed, showing that they could reach into any hospital and manipulate treatment decisions regardless of medical need or ethical considerations. But Jennifer Mills had learned something about herself over the past few weeks that even she hadn't fully understood. When it came to protecting her daughter and fighting for what was right, she was capable of extraordinary things, the kind of courage that could move mountains and change the world. Jennifer called Maria Santos and told her exactly what was happening. Within hours, news crews were stationed outside Children's Memorial Hospital, and the story of Emma's suspended treatment became a national rallying cry for healthcare reform. The images of a dying child being denied treatment in retaliation for her mother's whistleblowing activities created a public outrage that even Apex Pharmaceuticals couldn't withstand. Lisa Wung, the hospital insider who had been helping Dr. Chen gathered evidence, made a bold decision that would put her career at risk, but potentially save Emma's life. She went public with Emma's actual medical records, contradicting Dr. Richardson's claims about adverse reactions and providing documentation that showed the treatment had been working perfectly before it was arbitrarily suspended. The media attention and public pressure became too much for the hospital administrators to ignore. Emma's treatment was resumed under the supervision of a new team of physicians, with media representatives monitoring every aspect of her care to ensure that there would be no further attempts at retaliation or manipulation. Meanwhile, the FBI investigation into Apex Pharmaceuticals accelerated at an unprecedented pace. The evidence provided by Dr. Chen and corroborated by Dr. Wang was so comprehensive and damning that it was impossible for even the most corrupt officials to ignore or suppress. Within days, FBI agents were executing search warrants at Apex facilities across the country, seizing computers, financial records, and research files that would provide even more evidence of the conspiracy. The first arrests came exactly 1 week after the story broke. Marcus Richardson was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and involuntary manslaughter in connection with the deaths of children who had been denied treatment as part of Apex's research protocols. Several Apex executives were arrested on similar charges, along with FDA officials who had accepted bribes to delay approval of generic alternatives to Apex medications. But the most significant development came when other families began coming forward with their own stories of children who had been denied treatment or used as unwitting test subjects in pharmaceutical research. The investigation expanded to include dozens of other companies engaged in similar practices, revealing a systematic culture of corruption that pervaded the entire healthcare industry. Emma's treatment continued successfully under the watchful eyes of the media, and a new team of physicians who were committed to her recovery rather than corporate profits. After 2 weeks of continuous Amunex 47 infusions, her blood work showed dramatic improvement that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. The inflammation in her blood vessels was reducing rapidly, and her energy levels were returning to normal for the first time since her diagnosis. Jennifer watched her daughter playing with toys in her hospital bed, marveling at how different everything looked now compared to just a month earlier. A month ago, she had been a desperate single mother with no hope and no power, watching helplessly as her child wasted away. Now she was being hailed as a hero who had exposed one of the largest medical conspiracies in American history, and Emma was on the path to a full recovery. But Jennifer knew that the fight was far from over, and that the changes they had set in motion would take years to fully implement. The congressional hearings began 6 weeks after the initial story broke, with Jennifer testifying before the House Committee on Oversight and Reform about Emma's case and the systematic denial of treatment that had nearly cost her daughter's life. The hearing room was packed with families who had lost children to diseases that could have been treated if not for corporate greed and systematic corruption. "My daughter almost died not because effective treatment didn't exist, but because a pharmaceutical company decided her life wasn't profitable enough to save," Jennifer told the committee, her voice steady and strong as she spoke to a national television audience. She was 7 years old when they decided to let her die for research purposes. She was going to be allowed to suffer and die so that other children from wealthier families could receive better care, and so that Apex Pharmaceuticals could generate the research data they needed to justify their astronomical prices. The committee hearings revealed the full scope of the conspiracy that went far beyond just Apex Pharmaceuticals. Multiple companies had been engaged in similar practices, creating a healthcare system where access to life-saving medications was determined by a family's ability to pay inflated prices rather than medical need or ethical considerations. The investigation found that over 15,000 children had died over the past decade due to denied or delayed access to medications that were available, but priced beyond their family's reach. Each death had been classified as natural progression of disease in official medical records, when in reality they were the result of deliberate corporate decisions to prioritize profits over human life. The systematic nature of these deaths amounted to nothing less than medical genocide based on economic status, a form of eugenics that used financial barriers to determine which children lived and which died. Sarah Chen was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her courage in gathering the evidence that exposed the conspiracy, even though it had ultimately cost her life. Her family established the Sarah Chen Foundation to ensure that no child would ever again be denied life-saving treatment due to their family's financial circumstances. The legal ramifications of the conspiracy continued for years, with criminal trials, civil lawsuits, and regulatory reforms that fundamentally transformed the pharmaceutical industry. Apex Pharmaceuticals was eventually forced to pay over $50 billion in fines and settlements, making it the largest corporate penalty in American history. Several executives received lengthy prison sentences, including life terms for those who were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Most importantly, Congress passed the Emma Mills Act, comprehensive legislation named after Jennifer's daughter that mandated fundamental changes to how life-saving medications were priced and distributed. The law required that any medication developed with federal funding must be made available at cost to patients who could not afford market prices, and it established criminal penalties for healthcare providers who participated in research protocols that denied treatment to patients for non-medical reasons. The Emma Mills Act also created a new federal agency responsible for monitoring pharmaceutical pricing and investigating complaints about denied treatment, with the power to override corporate decisions that put profits ahead of patient welfare. The agency was given broad authority to seize patents and authorize generic production of any medication where pricing was found to be systematically excluding patients based on ability to pay. Emma made a complete recovery, surpassing even the most optimistic medical projections for her condition. The little girl who had been given 3 months to live grew up to become a physician herself, specializing in pediatric immunology and dedicating her career to ensuring that other children would receive the care that had almost been denied to her. She graduated from medical school exactly 20 years after her mother found that hidden file on Dr. Richardson's computer, and her graduation speech became a defining moment for a new generation of healthcare providers committed to putting patients before profits. My mother taught me that sometimes the most important battles are fought not by soldiers or politicians, but by ordinary people who refuse to accept that injustice is inevitable, Emma said, addressing her graduating class and a national television audience. She showed me that one person with evidence, determination, and an unshakable moral compass can expose the truth and change the world, no matter how powerful the forces trying to hide that truth might be. Jennifer sat in the audience, watching her daughter accept her medical degree, and thought about Dr. Sarah Chen, who had died to make this moment possible. She thought about all the children whose names had been on that spreadsheet, and all the families who had been told there was nothing more that could be done, while life-saving treatments existed, but were being withheld for corporate profit. The fight for healthcare justice continued around the world, but because of what Jennifer had discovered in a doctor's office on one desperate afternoon, no parent would ever again have to watch their child die while effective treatment sat in a warehouse, because they couldn't afford the inflated price set by corporate executives more concerned with stock prices than human life. As Jennifer and Emma left the graduation ceremony together, Emma asked the same question she had asked in the hospital all those years ago, though now it carried a completely different meaning. "Mommy, when can we go home?" This time, Jennifer's answer was different, reflecting the journey they had taken together and the world they had helped to change. "We are home, sweetheart." We're finally home in a world where every child gets the medical care they need, regardless of their family's ability to pay. The hidden file that Jennifer found on Dr. Richardson's computer had contained more than just evidence of corporate corruption and medical conspiracy. It had contained the power to save lives, expose systematic injustice, and prove that sometimes the most ordinary people are capable of the most extraordinary things when they refuse to accept that evil is inevitable. And in the end, that power had changed everything, creating a legacy that would protect children for generations to come, while ensuring that the sacrifice of Dr. Sarah Chen and the courage of Jennifer Mills would never be forgotten. Years passed, and Jennifer often found herself reflecting on the chain of events that had started with a simple doctor's appointment and had ended up changing the entire healthcare system. The investigation that began with Emma's case had uncovered corruption in dozens of pharmaceutical companies, leading to the largest healthcare reform in American history. The ripple effects of their exposure continued to spread across the globe. Other countries began investigating their own pharmaceutical industries, finding similar patterns of corruption and systematic denial of care. The European Union passed legislation modeled on the Emma Mills Act, and the World Health Organization established new international standards for pharmaceutical pricing and access to essential medications. Jennifer became a sought-after speaker at medical conferences and legislative hearings, sharing her story with audiences around the world. She never grew comfortable with the attention, preferring to focus on the practical work of ensuring that the reforms she had helped to create were actually being implemented effectively. She established the Jennifer Mills Foundation, which provided legal assistance to families fighting insurance denials and pharmaceutical companies that tried to deny care to their children. The foundation also funded research into rare childhood diseases, with the explicit requirement that any treatments developed with their money would be made available at cost to all patients regardless of their ability to pay. Emma's story became a case study in medical schools across the country, teaching future doctors about the ethical obligations they had to their patients and the dangers of allowing corporate interests to override medical judgment. Her case was cited in court decisions, referenced in legislative debates, and used as an example of how individual courage could create systemic change. Lisa Wong, who had risked her career to provide the evidence that corroborated Dr. Chen's findings, was promoted to Chief of Pediatrics at Children's Memorial Hospital. She used her position to implement new policies, ensuring that treatment decisions were based solely on medical need rather than ability to pay, and she established protocols for reporting any attempts at corporate interference in patient care. The hospital itself underwent a complete transformation, with new leadership committed to transparency and patient advocacy. The walls that had once displayed Dr. Richardson's awards were now covered with pictures of children who had been saved by the reforms that Jennifer's courage had made possible. Richardson himself was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after being convicted on multiple counts of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and racketeering. During his trial, evidence emerged that he had been responsible for the deaths of over 200 children who had been denied treatment as part of Apex's research protocols. His medical license was permanently revoked, and his assets were seized to pay compensation to the families of his victims. Apex Pharmaceuticals was eventually dissolved entirely, its assets distributed among the families it had harmed and used to fund public health initiatives. The company's executives faced criminal charges in multiple countries, and several were extradited to face trial in international courts for crimes against humanity. The pharmaceutical industry as a whole was forced to undergo fundamental changes in how it operated. New regulations required complete transparency in pricing decisions, mandated that a percentage of profits be used to provide medications to low-income patients, and established criminal penalties for any company found to be deliberately denying care for research purposes. Jennifer often thought about Dr. Sarah Chen and the sacrifice she had made to expose the truth. The Chen Foundation had grown into one of the largest healthcare advocacy organizations in the world, providing funding for medical research and legal assistance to families fighting for access to care. A memorial was established in Dr. Chen's honor at the clinic where Jennifer had first met her, with an inscription that read, "In memory of Dr. Sarah Chen, who gave her life to ensure that no child would be denied care based on their family's ability to pay. Her courage saved thousands of lives and changed the world." Emma graduated from medical school with highest honors, having been inspired by her own experience to dedicate her life to pediatric medicine. Her thesis research focused on developing new treatments for rare childhood diseases, with the explicit goal of making them accessible to all patients regardless of economic status. During her residency, Emma worked at the same hospital where she had nearly died as a child, now transformed into a model of ethical medical practice. She often walked past the office where Dr. Richardson had once worked, now converted into a patient family counseling center where social workers helped families navigate the healthcare system and access the resources they needed. The room where Jennifer had first discovered the evidence that would change everything had been preserved, as it was on that day, serving as a reminder of how easily corruption could hide behind the facade of professional respectability. Medical students were brought to see the room as part of their ethics training, learning about the importance of transparency and the dangers of allowing financial considerations to override patient welfare. Emma's first patient as a fully licensed physician was a 7-year-old girl with the same rare disease that had nearly killed her 2 decades earlier. But unlike Emma's experience, this child received treatment immediately upon diagnosis, without any consideration of her family's ability to pay. The medication that had once cost $180,000 for a treatment cycle was now available for less than $200, thanks to the reforms that Jennifer's courage had made possible. As Emma administered the first dose of medication to her young patient, she thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. If her mother had not found that file on Dr. Richardson's computer, if she had not had the courage to act on what she discovered, this little girl would be facing the same death sentence that Emma had once received. Jennifer continued to work at the diner and the accounting firm for several more years, preferring the normalcy of her regular job to the spotlight that came with her role as a healthcare advocate. Her coworkers knew about her story, but they treated her with the same casual friendship they always had, understanding that she valued being seen as Jennifer the waitress rather than Jennifer the crusader. But eventually, the demands of her advocacy work became too great to manage alongside her regular employment. The foundation she had established was helping hundreds of families each year, and the speaking engagements and consulting work took up more and more of her time. She quit her jobs and dedicated herself full-time to healthcare advocacy, using her unique perspective as someone who had experienced the system both as a victim and as someone who had successfully fought back against it. She became one of the most respected voices in healthcare reform, sought out by politicians, journalists, and other advocates for her insights and expertise. The apartment where Jennifer and Emma had lived during the darkest days of their fight became a landmark of sorts, with a small plaque marking it as the place where one of the most important healthcare investigations in American history had been planned. Visitors from around the world would come to see the modest home, where an ordinary single mother had decided to take on one of the most powerful corporations in the world. Rodriguez, who had cared for Emma during some of the most dangerous days of Jennifer's investigation, became like a grandmother to Emma and remained a close friend to Jennifer throughout the years. She often said that she had known from the beginning that Jennifer was someone special, someone who would never give up when it came to protecting her daughter. The black sedan that had followed Jennifer during her investigation was eventually traced back to a private security firm that had been hired by Apex Pharmaceuticals to intimidate and silence potential whistleblowers. The men who had threatened Jennifer were prosecuted for stalking and conspiracy, receiving prison sentences that served as a warning to other corporations that might consider using similar tactics. The text message that had threatened Jennifer in the hospital parking garage was traced to a burner phone purchased by an Apex executive, providing additional evidence of the company's willingness to use intimidation and threats to protect their criminal enterprise. The executive received an additional 15-year sentence for witness intimidation. As Emma established her own medical practice, specializing in treating children with rare diseases, she often reflected on the lessons her mother had taught her about standing up for what was right even when it was dangerous. She instilled those same values in her own children, teaching them that they had an obligation to use their privileges and opportunities to help others who were less fortunate. The medical community that had once been corrupted by pharmaceutical money slowly transformed into a profession that prioritized patient welfare above all other considerations. New codes of ethics were established, requiring doctors to report any attempts by corporations to influence their treatment decisions, and medical schools began requiring courses in healthcare advocacy and patient rights. Jennifer's story became the subject of books, documentaries, and feature films, but she always insisted that the real heroes were Dr. Sarah Chen, who had given her life to gather the evidence, and Dr. Lisa Wang, who had risked her career to provide the corroboration that made their case unassailable. The legacy of their courage extended far beyond the specific reforms they had achieved. They had demonstrated that ordinary people could take on powerful corporations and win, that the truth could prevail over money and influence, and that the medical profession could be reformed when healthcare providers were willing to put their patients' needs above their own financial interests. As Jennifer grew older, she often wondered what would have happened if she had never seen that file on Dr. Richardson's computer, if she had simply accepted his diagnosis and Emma's death sentence without questioning the system that had failed them. The thought filled her with sadness for all the families who had lost children before she exposed the conspiracy, but also with pride in what they had accomplished together. Emma eventually became the chief of pediatrics at a major teaching hospital, using her position to train a new generation of physicians committed to ethical practice and patient advocacy. She established research programs focused on developing treatments for rare diseases, always with the requirement that any resulting medications would be made available to all patients regardless of their economic status. The principles that Jennifer had fought for became so embedded in the healthcare system that younger doctors and medical students sometimes took them for granted, not fully understanding how different things had been before the Emma Mills Act transformed the industry. But Emma made sure that they understood the history, sharing her mother's story and the sacrifices that had been made to create the system they now worked in. On the 20th anniversary of the first news story that had exposed the conspiracy, Jennifer and Emma were invited to speak at a special session of Congress dedicated to reviewing the impact of healthcare reform. They shared the stage with other families who had been affected by pharmaceutical corruption, creating a powerful reminder of why the reforms had been necessary. Jennifer's speech that day summarized not just her own experience, but the broader lessons that could be learned from their fight. We discovered that when ordinary people refuse to accept injustice, when they are willing to risk everything for the truth, they can change the world. The system told us that Emma had to die because we couldn't afford to save her. We refused to accept that, and in refusing, we saved not just Emma but thousands of other children who came after her. The audience gave them a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes, a recognition not just of their courage, but of the profound changes their actions had created throughout the healthcare system. The reforms they had fought for had become so fundamental to American healthcare that it was difficult to imagine the system operating any other way. As they left the Capitol building together, Emma asked her mother the same question she had asked all those years ago in the hospital. "When can we go home?" But now the question carried a different meaning, representing not a desire to escape, but a recognition that they had helped create a world where every family could feel at home in the healthcare system, where no parent would ever again have to watch their child die because they couldn't afford treatment. Jennifer's answer reflected the journey they had taken together and the world they had helped to create. "We are home, sweetheart. We've always been home, because home is anywhere you're fighting for what's right and protecting the people you love." The hidden file that Jennifer had discovered on Dr. Richardson's computer had contained more than just evidence of corruption and conspiracy. It had contained the key to transforming an entire industry, the power to save countless lives, and the proof that sometimes the most extraordinary changes begin with the most ordinary people who simply refuse to accept that evil is inevitable. And in the end, that refusal to accept injustice had changed not just their own lives, but the lives of millions of families around the world, creating a legacy of hope and healing that would endure for generations to come. News that made Jennifer's blood run cold. Sarah Chen had been found dead in her apartment, apparently the victim of a drug overdose. The news report mentioned that Dr. Chen had a history of depression and substance abuse following the loss of her medical license. Jennifer knew it was a lie. Chen had been murdered because she had been gathering evidence against Apex Pharmaceuticals. But what Jennifer didn't know was that Dr. Chen had anticipated this possibility. 3 days after Dr. Chen's death, Jennifer received a package with no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a note written in Dr. Chen's handwriting. "If you're reading this, they've silenced me. Everything you need is on this drive. Trust no one in the medical establishment. Take this to Maria Santos at Channel 7 News. She's been investigating Apex for 2 years, but couldn't get the evidence she needed. The password is Emma's birthday." Jennifer's hands shook as she plugged the USB drive into her laptop. The password worked, and she found herself looking at hundreds of documents, emails, financial records, and audio recordings that detailed the full scope of Apex Pharmaceuticals' conspiracy. There were emails between Apex executives discussing which children to let die for their research. Financial records showing bribes paid to FDA officials and physicians. Audio recordings of phone calls where Apex executives laughed about population control through selective treatment. Most horrifying of all, there was a spreadsheet with over 3,000 names of children who had been denied treatment as part of Apex's research protocols. Emma's name was on the list, along with a notation that read ideal control subject isolated, poor, no advocacy support. Jennifer realized that Dr. Chen's death meant she was now the only person who possessed this evidence. The weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming, but she also knew that thousands of children's lives depended on what she did next. The next morning, Jennifer arranged for Emma to stay with Mrs. Rodriguez again and drove to Channel 7 News. Maria Santos was an investigative reporter who had built a reputation for taking on powerful corporations and winning. Jennifer waited in the lobby for 3 hours before Maria Santos agreed to see her. Santos was a small, intense woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. "You have evidence about Apex Pharmaceuticals?" Santos asked, cutting straight to the point. Jennifer pulled out the USB drive. Sarah Chen gathered this before she was murdered. "It proves that Apex is systematically denying treatment to children to use them as control subjects in research studies." Santos plugged the USB drive into her computer and began scrolling through the files. As she read, her expression grew darker and more determined. "This is it," Santos said finally. "This is what I've been looking for. But Jennifer, you understand what this means. If we expose this, Apex will come after you with everything they have. They've already killed Doctor. They won't hesitate to target you and your daughter." Jennifer thought about Emma, growing weaker every day while the medication that could save her life sat in warehouses. She thought about the 3,000 other children on that spreadsheet, all of them being sacrificed for corporate profits. "They're already killing my daughter," Jennifer said. "At least this way, she has a chance." Maria Santos spent the next week verifying the documents and building additional sources. She reached out to Dr. Lisa Wang at Children's Memorial Hospital, who confirmed that she had been working with Dr. Chen and was willing to go on record about the conspiracy. Wang provided additional evidence, including internal hospital memos directing physicians to steer certain patients away from effective treatments in favor of more expensive alternatives that would benefit Apex's research partnerships. But as they prepared to publish the story, Apex Pharmaceuticals made a move that none of them anticipated. Emma collapsed at school. Jennifer received the call while she was at Maria Santos's office, going over the final details of their exposé. Emma had been rushed to Children's Memorial Hospital, and Dr. Richardson was demanding to see Jennifer immediately. Jennifer arrived at the hospital to find Emma unconscious in the ICU, surrounded by machines and monitors. Richardson was waiting for her with a grim expression. "Emma's condition has deteriorated rapidly," he said. "She's experiencing systemic organ failure. We need to start treatment with a Munex 47 immediately, or she'll be dead within 48 hours. Jennifer stared at him, this man who had been planning to let her daughter die for research purposes, now claiming he wanted to save her life. "And the cost?" Jennifer asked. "The insurance company has suddenly approved the treatment, Dr. Richardson said. "Full coverage, no questions asked. We can start the infusions this afternoon." Jennifer realized what was happening. Apex had learned about the investigation and was trying to silence her by saving Emma's life. They were betting that a grateful mother wouldn't destroy the company that had rescued her daughter from death. They were wrong. "Start the treatment," Jennifer said. "But Dr. Richardson, you should know that I've seen your files. I know about the research protocols, the control subjects, everything." Richardson's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about. I know about the 3,000 children on your list. I know about the bribes, the covered-up deaths, all of it. And tomorrow morning, the whole world is going to know too." Jennifer left Dr. Richardson standing in the ICU and returned to Channel 7 News. She called Maria Santos from the hospital parking lot. "They're treating Emma," she told the reporter. "They're trying to buy my silence by saving her life. Are you going to let them?" Santos asked. Jennifer looked back at the hospital, where her daughter was finally receiving the treatment that could save her life. Treatment that had been available all along, but withheld for corporate profit. "No," Jennifer said. "We publish the story tomorrow as planned. Emma's getting better, but there are thousands of other children who won't be so lucky unless we stop this." The story broke on a Wednesday morning, simultaneously across television, print, and online media. Maria Santos had coordinated with journalists across the country to ensure maximum impact. The headline read, "Children Left to Die, Pharmaceutical Giant's Secret Research Program Exposed." The evidence was overwhelming. Financial documents showing bribes to FDA officials. Audio recordings of Apex executives discussing which children to let die. Email chains between physicians detailing how to identify and exclude patients who couldn't afford treatment. But the most damning evidence was the spreadsheet with 3,000 names of children who had been deliberately denied treatment to serve as control subjects. Each name represented a family destroyed, a life cut short for the sake of corporate profits. The public reaction was immediate and furious. Protests erupted outside Apex Pharmaceuticals' headquarters. Families of children who had died began filing lawsuits. The FBI launched a criminal investigation. But Apex's response was swift and vicious. That afternoon, Jennifer received a call from the hospital. Emma's treatment had been suspended. Richardson claimed there had been an adverse reaction that made it too dangerous to continue the Amunix 47 infusions. Jennifer raced to the hospital to find Emma back in the ICU, her condition rapidly deteriorating. Richardson was nowhere to be found, and the nursing staff claimed they were just following orders. Jennifer realized that Apex was willing to let Emma die to send a message to anyone else who might consider exposing their crimes. But Jennifer, Mills, had learned something about herself over the past few weeks. When it came to protecting her daughter and fighting for what was right, she was capable of extraordinary things. Jennifer called Maria Santos and told her what was happening. Within hours, news crews were stationed outside Children's Memorial Hospital. The story of Emma's suspended treatment became a national rallying cry. Lisa Wang, the hospital insider who had been helping Dr. Chen, made a bold decision. She publicly contradicted Dr. Richardson's claim about adverse reactions and provided Emma's actual medical records, which showed that the treatment had been working perfectly. The media attention and public pressure became too much for the hospital administrators to ignore. Emma's treatment was resumed under the supervision of a new team of physicians, with media representatives monitoring every aspect of her care. Meanwhile, the FBI investigation into Apex Pharmaceuticals accelerated. The evidence provided by Dr. Chen and corroborated by Dr. Wang was so comprehensive that it was impossible to ignore. Within days, FBI agents were executing search warrants at Apex facilities across the country. The first arrests came a week later. Marcus Richardson was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and involuntary manslaughter in connection with the deaths of children who had been denied treatment. Several Apex executives were arrested on similar charges, along with FDA officials who had accepted bribes to delay approval of generic alternatives to Apex medications. But the most significant development came when other families began coming forward. Parents who had lost children to rare diseases started sharing their stories, many of them describing circumstances identical to what Jennifer had uncovered. The investigation expanded to include dozens of other pharmaceutical companies engaged in similar practices. Emma's treatment continued successfully. After 2 weeks of Amunix 47 infusions, her blood work showed dramatic improvement. The inflammation in her blood vessels was reducing, and her energy levels were returning to normal. Jennifer watched her daughter playing with toys in her hospital bed and marveled at how different everything looked now. A month ago, she had been a desperate single mother with no hope and no power. Now she was being hailed as a hero who had exposed one of the largest medical conspiracies in American history. But Jennifer knew the fight was far from over. The congressional hearings began a month later. Jennifer testified before the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, telling Emma's story and presenting the evidence that Dr. Chen had died to protect. My daughter almost died not because effective treatment didn't exist, but because a pharmaceutical company decided her life wasn't profitable enough to save, Jennifer told the committee. She was 7 years old. She was going to be allowed to die so that other children from wealthier families could receive better care. The committee hearings revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. It wasn't just Apex Pharmaceuticals. Multiple companies had been engaged in similar practices, creating a system where access to life-saving medications was determined by a family's ability to pay inflated prices rather than medical need. The investigation found that over 15,000 children had died over the past decade due to denied or delayed access to medications that were available but priced beyond their family's reach. Each death had been classified as natural progression of disease, when in reality, they were the result of deliberate corporate decisions to prioritize profits over human life. Sarah Chen was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her courage in gathering the evidence that exposed the conspiracy. Her family established a foundation to ensure that no child would ever again be denied life-saving treatment due to their family's financial circumstances. The legal ramifications continued for years. Apex Pharmaceuticals was eventually forced to pay over $50 billion in fines and settlements, and several executives received lengthy prison sentences. The FDA was reorganized with new oversight mechanisms to prevent future corruption. Most importantly, Congress passed the Emma Mills Act, named after Jennifer's daughter. The legislation mandated that any medication developed with federal funding must be made available at cost to patients who could not afford market prices. It also established criminal penalties for healthcare providers who participated in research protocols that denied treatment to patients for non-medical reasons. Emma made a full recovery. The little girl who had been given 3 months to live grew up to become a physician herself, specializing in pediatric immunology. She dedicated her career to ensuring that other children would receive the care that had almost been denied to her. Jennifer returned to her quiet life as a single mother, but she remained active in advocacy for healthcare reform. She spoke at medical conferences, testified at legislative hearings, and worked with families facing similar struggles. Years later, when journalists asked Jennifer how she had found the courage to take on such a powerful enemy, her answer was always the same. I wasn't brave. I was just a mother who refused to let her daughter die for someone else's profit. The story of Jennifer Mills and her daughter Emma became a turning point in American healthcare. It demonstrated that even the most powerful corporations could be held accountable when ordinary people refused to accept injustice. But perhaps most importantly, it proved that love for a child could move mountains, expose conspiracies, and change the world. Emma graduated from medical school 20 years after her mother found that hidden file on Dr. Richardson's computer. At her graduation ceremony, she spoke about the day her mother had saved not just her life, but the lives of thousands of other children. My mother taught me that sometimes the most important battles are fought not by soldiers or politicians, but by ordinary people who refuse to accept that things can't be changed, Emma said. She showed me that one person with evidence and determination can expose the truth, no matter how powerful the forces trying to hide it. Jennifer sat in the audience, watching her daughter accept her medical degree, and thought about Dr. Sarah Chen, who had died to make this moment possible. She thought about all the children whose names had been on that spreadsheet, and all the families who had been told there was nothing more that could be done. The fight for healthcare justice continued, but because of what Jennifer had discovered in a doctor's office on one desperate afternoon, no parent would ever again have to watch their child die while life-saving treatment sat in a warehouse because they couldn't afford the inflated price. As Jennifer and Emma left the graduation ceremony together, Emma asked the same question she had asked in the hospital all those years ago. "Mommy, when can we go home?" This time, Jennifer's answer was different. "We are home, sweetheart. We're finally home." The hidden file that Jennifer found on Dr. Richardson's computer had contained more than just evidence of corporate corruption. It had contained the power to save lives, expose injustice, and prove that sometimes the most ordinary people are capable of the most extraordinary things. And in the end, that power had changed everything.